He is in the same country as one of his kids, but there's no plans to see old mate Harry, are there?
Exactly the way they are. That his son is a and they don't get along anymore.
Harry expected distance. He expected silence. He may even have expected another carefully worded palace statement. But he did not expect this. During preparations for a formal royal service, a revised succession prayer reaches him, and one line changes everything. His place has been removed, and another royal name inserted where his once stood. At first, Harry reads it twice. Then he stops. Because this is not merely wording. To him, it feels like a message from his father. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Harry keeps staring at the page, searching for an explanation that never comes. In this dramatized story, the official succession prayer is a ceremonial prayer used to acknowledge continuity, duty, and the senior royal line. It does not rewrite the legal line of succession, but symbolically, it matters. And this version is unmistakable. King Charles privately approved wording that removed Harry's ceremonial reference and replaced it with Prince Edward for the forthcoming service. Meghan sees the change in Harry before she sees the document. His shoulders tighten, his voice disappears. She asks what happened, and he turns the page toward her. Only then does he speak. He changed it. The shock is not that a palace text has been edited. The shock is that his father altered a ritual that acknowledged him as part of the crown's future, making the loss feel intimate. Charles feels that choice in a different room. After approving the revised wording, the king places his pen beside the page and says nothing. Camilla watches him, sensing the decision has cost him more than he admits. She knows why Edward was chosen. The monarch wanted the prayer to reflect active service to the crown, meaning royals carrying duties for the sovereign. That turns a wording change into a judgment about loyalty, presence, and who still carries the burden. William receives the news and immediately asks who authorized the final wording. When he learns his father personally cleared it, the prince goes silent. No anonymous courtier can be blamed. No committee can absorb the anger. The decision leads straight back to Charles, and the future king understands how Harry will read that fact. For both brothers, the wording now carries unfinished arguments between them. Harry does not call Charles. Not yet. He folds the page once, looks at Meghan, and asks the question capable of making the wound deeper. Did William know before I did? Harry can survive another palace decision, but discovering who stood beside Charles when it was made could reopen every wound the brothers never managed to close. Behind the altered prayer are not simply 4 royal names. There is a father who cannot separate love from duty, an elder son preparing to inherit everything, a younger son who believes belonging is disappearing piece by piece, and a brother chosen to occupy the space left behind. Charles may call it continuity. Harry experiences it as erasure, and William knows that whatever explanation comes next, he will somehow be pulled into the middle. Charles carries 2 burdens at once, and that is exactly why this moment cuts so deeply. He is a father, but he is also the monarch, and in his mind those roles can no longer be blurred without cost. Only later does the deeper meaning surface. The succession prayer is ceremonial language tied to continuity, while official duties simply mean the public work royals perform on behalf of the crown. That matters because he believes public symbols must match lived service. Yet that same belief collides with a painful truth. However far Harry lives from palace life, he is still his son. Harry feels the wound in a quieter, harsher way. Sitting with Meghan, he admits the loss of wording is not the deepest injury. What haunts him is the image of Charles making the decision calmly, with no visible hesitation, as though removing his name required nothing more than steady ink. Meghan tries to separate institution from blood, reminding him that ceremonial language is not the same as paternal love. But he keeps returning to one sentence, almost under his breath. The king knew exactly whose name he was removing. William receives the call and lowers his voice almost immediately. He does not ask whether Harry is upset. He asks whether his brother was told the full reasoning, because the prince already understands how brutal the change will look without context. He wants to defend his father, yet he also knows that defending the monarch may sound like abandoning the younger son. That is the trap closing around him. If he protects Charles, Harry will hear betrayal. If he openly sides with Harry, he risks deepening a fracture inside the crown itself now. Edward sees the text and feels no triumph. He was never consulted before the replacement was approved, and that matters because his years of service now risk looking like a reward for another man's pain. Sophie reads his unease immediately. The trusted confidant tells him that accepting ceremonial responsibility does not mean celebrating the circumstances, especially when the palace is preparing to present the change as routine. And that is when the question hardens. Why did Charles decide the wording could no longer stand? The answer lies in one exchange Charles never forgot. The decision did not begin with a prayer book. It began weeks earlier, inside a quiet room where Charles asked for reassurance, and Harry gave him something very different. There were no cameras, no crowd, and no ceremonial music to soften what followed. Only father and son, speaking across years of accumulated resentment. By the end of that conversation, Charles had heard one sentence he could not forget, and Harry had unknowingly triggered the symbolic punishment that would later stun him. Charles had already begun questioning how long family affection could be presented as institutional unity. Harry still wanted recognition as the king's son, but he no longer wanted palace expectations controlling his independent life. Active royal service meant carrying official duties on behalf of the sovereign, and that distinction had become increasingly important. William understood the danger immediately. The prince warned his father that changing ceremonial symbols might create a deeper crisis than simply tolerating the uncomfortable contradiction. Harry entered Clarence's house believing the conversation would be about attendance, not belonging. The royal residence served as one of Charles's working bases, but that afternoon it became something far more personal. The king asked whether his son would commit to attending a future crown service under agreed palace protocol, meaning the formal rules governing how working royals appear and behave at official events. Harry hesitated, then answered with a sentence that changed everything. "I will come as your son, not as an extension of the institution." Charles did not raise his voice. That made the silence afterward worse. He told Harry that the family's public identity could not keep separating the son from the royal role whenever it became uncomfortable. The younger man heard control in those words. His father heard rejection in the reply. Neither intended to surrender. Harry believed love should survive without conditions, while the monarch believed public symbolism could not pretend that duty remained unchanged when their lives had moved in opposite directions. William remained after Harry left, and the atmosphere hardened almost immediately. Charles asked whether royal prayers should continue naming people who no longer undertook formal duties. The future king did not tell him to remove his brother, but he did not dismiss the question either. He warned again that symbolic changes could be interpreted as punishment, especially when old family wounds were already exposed. The king listened, but something in him had already shifted. Days later, Charles received an alternative draft centered on working royals. He read it slowly, circled Edward's name, closed the folder, and ordered that nothing be announced until the final ceremonial review. That private decision stayed hidden until Harry discovered the truth. Once he learned William had been in the room when the idea first surfaced, the argument stopped being about prayer and became a question of betrayal. Harry does not begin with his father. He begins with William. The conversation is brief at first, almost unnervingly controlled, until one fact breaks through the restraint. The prince had been present when Charles first questioned whether Harry's name still belonged in the ceremonial wording. Suddenly, every old grievance rushes back into the room. Harry wants to know whether his brother defended him. William wants him to understand that silence is not the same thing as betrayal. Harry refuses to let aides carry this argument for them. He wants his brother's own words, because the dispute is no longer about a line in a prayer. William tries to explain that legal succession, the constitutional order determining who can inherit the crown, has not changed, and no formal right has been removed. But Harry cuts through the distinction. His father deliberately changed the ceremonial language, and to him, That makes the symbolism impossible to dismiss. Harry looks straight at William and finally says it. "You were there when he decided I no longer belonged in it." The prince stiffens and shifts his chair back slightly before answering. Charles had not made the final decision in that room, he insists. The discussion was about whether ceremonial wording still matched active royal service, not about punishing his brother. But Harry hears only one thing. William knew the question existed before he did. William chooses his next words carefully, and that restraint only sharpens the tension. He admits he did not strongly argue for keeping Harry's name. The future king believed their father had the right to make ceremonial language reflect those still carrying official duties. Harry's expression hardens. To him, that sounds like confirmation of abandonment. He asks whether William would accept the same reasoning if their positions were reversed. For a moment, the prince has no easy answer. William then reveals the detail that changes everything. Charles originally considered removing the individual reference completely, leaving no replacement at all. Edward's name came later. That means the decision did not begin as one brother being exchanged for another. It evolved into a deliberate substitution. Harry immediately understands the significance. Someone had to choose Edward. Someone had to decide that an empty space was not enough. Harry's anger shifts direction. He is still furious with William, but the center of the conflict moves back toward Charles. The prince warns him that their father will not apologize for believing active service should matter. Harry answers without hesitation. He is not asking for an apology yet. He wants to know whether the king still sees him as part of the family he publicly represents. The brothers separate without reconciliation, and Harry leaves knowing the final answer can only come from Charles. Charles has spent his life surrounded by language designed to soften hard decisions. This time, he refuses to hide behind it. When Harry demands to know why Edward took his place, the king does not blame advisors, tradition, or clerical drafting. He accepts responsibility. That should make the conversation simpler. Instead, it makes it devastating. Because Charles is about to explain that the replacement was not designed to punish his son. It was designed to define service. Charles meets Harry without the usual distance between them. He holds the marked draft for a moment, then sets it down before speaking. The ceremonial wording in this dramatized story falls under the sovereign's approval, meaning advisors, clergy, and palace officials may suggest changes, but the final symbolic decision belongs to the monarch. He tells his son plainly that he approved the revision himself. He would rather absorb Harry's anger than let faceless officials carry blame for something he chose. Harry does not soften. He asks whether years of being his father's son can really be outweighed by stepping away from official royal work. Charles answers carefully. Fatherhood, he says, is permanent. Monarchy is different. It is an institution built around public duty, and Edward has spent years carrying that burden quietly, appearing when required, and avoiding the family warfare that has consumed others. The king insists that a prayer tied to crown continuity should recognize those still sustaining that work. Harry hears the logic. He also hears the separation. Charles then reveals something Harry never expected. Edward did not welcome the decision when he first learned what his inclusion meant. The Duke feared that accepting the place would make him look like an active participant in his nephew's humiliation. He told Charles he did not want service to become rivalry. The monarch personally asked him to accept anyway, arguing that the change was about responsibility, not victory. For Harry, that distinction matters. It does not erase the wound, but it shifts some of the anger away from Edward. Camilla becomes part of the story next, and that detail cuts even deeper. Charles admits she urged him to tell Harry before the revised text circulated. The queen consort believed silence would make the change feel harsher than it was intended to be. He ignored that advice because he feared advance warning would become another negotiation, another argument, another attempt to reverse the decision before it was final. The secrecy, then, was deliberate. Charles admits it, and Harry understands immediately why the betrayal felt so calculated. Harry leaves with the reasoning finally exposed. He understands why Edward was chosen, but he cannot accept how the choice was hidden from him. Charles may control the wording, but he cannot control what the replacement now means to Edward, Harry, or everyone watching the family interpret it. The next wound will belong to the man whose name was inserted into the space between them. For Edward, there is no victory in seeing his name where Harry's once stood. The new wording gives him greater ceremonial prominence, yet every line reminds him why the space became available. When the final service copy reaches him, he does not smile. He closes it. Sophie immediately understands. Her husband has been handed recognition by the crown, but recognition wrapped inside another man's rejection can feel less like an honor than a burden. Edward reads the altered passage again, slower this time, and the discomfort deepens. His inclusion changes nothing in the legal line of succession, which is the constitutional order determining who may inherit the crown. In this dramatized account, the change is ceremonial only. But symbolism can wound more deeply than law, especially when the public can reduce a complicated family fracture to one brutal idea. One brother has been removed, another inserted in his place. That is exactly what he fears. Sophie watches him shut the booklet and knows what years of quiet duty have meant to him. He has built his role around consistency, restraint, and service without spectacle. The trusted confidant also knows how easily that reputation could now be twisted into ambition. Edward finally says what has been sitting between them. He cannot pretend he does not know whose place he is occupying. She answers carefully. Refusing the role now might not protect Harry at all. It could make the removal look even more dramatic, turning private pain into another public rebellion. Edward considers going back to Charles. He could ask the king to restore neutral wording, remove the individual reference altogether, and end the appearance of replacement. Sophie warns that openly challenging the sovereign would create another family rupture at the exact moment everyone is already searching for sides. But she does not tell her husband to remain silent. Instead, she urges him to do something far more personal, speak directly to Harry before the service, and make clear that he never asked for this. Edward makes the call himself. When Harry answers, he does not defend the wording or hide behind duty. The Duke tells him plainly that he never requested the change and would never have agreed to become a weapon against him. Harry is silent at first, caught off guard by the lack of hostility. Then something unexpected happens. He tells Edward that his anger is with the decision, not with him. Harry feels the distinction settle in slowly. For the first time since receiving the revised prayer, he separates the person named from the person who removed him. Edward is not the enemy. William was not the sole architect. That leaves only one relationship still carrying the full weight of the wound: Charles. The replacement that seemed designed to divide the family has unexpectedly cleared the way for the conversation neither father nor son can avoid any longer. The most important conversation happens without a prayer book on the table. No advisors, no private secretaries, no William, no Meghan, no one available to translate hurt into institutional language. Charles and Harry sit opposite one another as father and son, and for the first time since the change became known, neither man argues about procedure. They speak instead about what the decision felt like. That shift, small, almost fragile, finally allows something years of formal statements never could. Harry asks for this second meeting after speaking with Edward, and that choice matters. He is no longer arriving to demand that the old wording be restored immediately. He wants something simpler and, in many ways, harder: acknowledgement. The ceremonial position, the symbolic place given to a royal within the wording of an official observance, may not carry constitutional power, but discovering its removal indirectly made the decision feel calculated. To him, secrecy turned symbolism into rejection. Charles enters knowing he cannot reverse every institutional choice simply because it causes pain. The king believes the crown must still distinguish between family membership and active public duty, even when that distinction hurts. But he also knows the method failed. By keeping the decision quiet until the revised wording circulated, he allowed an administrative change to become a deeply personal wound. That realization hangs between them before either man finally breaks the silence. Harry speaks first. "I could have heard it from you. Nothing more." Charles does not interrupt, defend himself, or reach for procedure. He listens as his son explains that the first shock was not losing a ceremonial reference. It was fearing that he was slowly being erased from his father's emotional world as well. The king finally answers that withholding the decision was a mistake. He still believes the principle was right, but he accepts that silence made it crueler than it needed to be. Charles then draws the line he will not cross. He will not restore Harry's old place simply to quiet criticism or pretend royal roles have not changed. But the monarch makes a different promise. Future decisions that directly affect family members will be communicated privately before becoming official. Harry absorbs that carefully. For the first time, he stops asking institutional recognition to prove paternal love, and his father finally accepts that institutional authority can still wound the people closest to him. Harry leaves understanding that the prayer may remain altered. Charles leaves knowing that keeping a decision does not excuse how it was delivered. Their understanding is fragile, but real. Father and son are calmer than before, yet outside those walls, the revised words are about to become public, and the world will interpret them far more brutally than either man now does. By morning, the private symbolism belongs to everyone. Commentators dissect every word. Broadcasters debate whether the crown has publicly downgraded a prince who already surrendered his working role. Supporters of Harry see humiliation. Defenders of Charles see overdue clarity. Yet one image captures the entire storm better than any panel discussion. Outside Buckingham Palace, phones rise as a newspaper front page is held above the crowd. Its enormous headline reducing years of family pain to 4 brutal words: Harry replaced in prayer. Harry watches the reaction spread faster than any palace explanation can contain it. The legal succession, the constitutional order deciding who may inherit the crown, has not changed, but ceremonial language is easier to understand emotionally. One altered line becomes shorthand for years of separation, resentment, and unanswered questions. Palace communications stress that Edward's inclusion reflects current royal service and does not remove hereditary rights. The explanation is exact, but exact language cannot compete with the brutal simplicity of replacement. Outside Buckingham Palace, the argument becomes physical and immediate. Reporters hold up the fictional front page while a small crowd gathers behind them. One supporter calls the decision unnecessarily cold, saying no father should let ceremony become humiliation. Another voice pushes back, arguing that the crown cannot indefinitely honor roles people no longer perform. The palace gates become a dividing line between two interpretations of the same act: punishment to one side, institutional clarity to the other. Harry hears strangers debating whether his father still considers him family, and that cuts deeper than he expects. Meghan watches the broadcast beside him and asks whether he regrets not demanding that Charles reverse the wording. He answers no. The private conversation mattered more than forcing a public victory. For the first time, he understands that winning back a ceremonial phrase would not repair what actually broke. Meghan sees the change in him too. The anger remains, but it no longer controls every conclusion. William quietly intervenes before the palace response hardens. The prince tells staff not to describe the revision as punishment or discipline, because that language would turn an already painful decision into public humiliation. His restraint matters. For Harry, it confirms that his brother does not want the change weaponized against him. Charles then rejects calls for another statement. The king believes further explanation would feed the storm, not end it, and chooses silence despite the pressure. Harry knows the final test is now unavoidable. The service is approaching, and soon the altered prayer will be spoken aloud. The headlines have delivered their verdict, but the real meaning will be decided somewhere quieter. Inside Harry, Charles, and the family forced to hear what one changed line now represents. The prayer is not changed back. Harry's former reference does not suddenly reappear. Charles does not retreat from the principle he defended, and Edward does not surrender the duty placed before him. On paper, the decision stands exactly as the king approved it. Yet emotionally, something has shifted. What began as an act Harry experienced as rejection becomes a painful boundary both father and son are finally forced to acknowledge. Royal service can change. Ceremonial status can change. But family cannot survive if silence explains everything. Harry receives confirmation that the final service has gone ahead with Edward's ceremonial reference intact. The crown has preserved its distinction between active institutional duty and private family relationships, while legal succession, the constitutional order determining who may inherit the throne, remains untouched. That matters because no prayer can rewrite Harry's position under law, and no altered wording can erase the fact that he remains Charles's son. The conflict has always been symbolic, but symbols can still carry enormous emotional weight. Harry reads the message once, sets his phone down, and does not react with the anger Meghan expected. She asks if he is all right. He pauses before answering that he finally understands what was taken from him, and, just as importantly, what was not. The ceremonial recognition is gone. His relationship with his father is wounded, but neither fact proves that he has been emotionally disowned. For the first time, he allows those truths to exist separately. Charles speaks briefly with Edward after the ceremony and thanks him for carrying an uncomfortable responsibility without turning it into personal advancement. The king knows the role placed his brother inside a conflict he never sought. Later, he sends Harry a private message. It is not an apology for changing the prayer. Instead, the monarch acknowledges that their last conversation mattered, and that silence should never again be allowed to explain a decision carrying such personal consequences. Harry accepts the symbolic loss without allowing it to define his place in the family. Charles keeps the decision while accepting that authority without communication can wound more deeply than intended. William no longer stands between them as the battlefield for every grievance, and Edward carries the ceremonial role without treating it as victory. The verdict is final. This was neither Harry's destruction nor Charles's triumph. It was the moment the family stopped pretending affection and royal duty were the same thing. The crown could remove a name from a prayer. It could not remove a son from a father's life. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.